The council chamber stretched vast and empty, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 1,000 distant stars. Ambassador Kelrix stood at the center podium, his scaled hands trembling slightly as he held the data tablet. Around him, representatives from 200 civilizations watched with expressions ranging from boredom to mild amusement. Honorable council members, Kelrix began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. I come before you with evidence of a significant anomaly in Sector 7.3. A floating jellyfish-like creature, Council Member Thess, pulsed with dim colors. Another resource dispute, Ambassador? This could have been handled in subcommittee. Kelrix shook his head, his neck scales rippling. No, Honorable Thess. This concerns the old quarantine zone. The Forbidden Region established 10,000 cycles ago. That got their attention. Several representatives leaned forward. Others muttered among themselves. The sensors have detected transmissions, Kelrix continued. Energy signatures matching those described in the ancient archives. The signatures that were supposedly from Earth. Laughter erupted throughout the chamber. Not polite chuckles, but genuine amusement that echoed off the walls. Council Leader Moravix, a being of pure energy contained in a diplomatic suit, spoke with a voice like wind chimes. Ambassador Kelrix, surely you do not believe in children's tales? Earth is a myth. Humans are propaganda, invented by our ancestors to justify their wars. With respect, Council Leader, I have reviewed the original documents, fairy stories. A three-armed delegate shouted from the upper gallery. Warnings to children about what happens when species refuse to join the peaceful collective. Be good, or the humans will come and eat you. My own offspring giggle at such nonsense. Kelrix felt his confidence crumbling, but he pressed on. The archives describe humans as extremely dangerous, aggressive, creative, unwilling to accept defeat. They supposedly destroyed themselves in nuclear fire rather than surrender to each other. But what if that was wrong? What if they survived? More laughter. Thess pulsed brighter, which Kelrix recognized as their species' equivalent of eye-rolling. And I suppose they have been hiding in that empty sector for 10 millennia? Doing what, Ambassador? Knitting? Preparing, Kelrix said quietly. The transmissions are complex, advanced. Someone is out there, and they are using technology. Moravix's energy field dimmed, a sign of growing impatience. Ambassador, the Council has real concerns to address. The Skreta swarm has been expanding their territory. 3 colonies have gone silent in the past month. We need to discuss trade sanctions and diplomatic pressure, not chase ghosts from the past. Kelrix felt his argument slipping away. Honorable Council, the Skreta are precisely why we should investigate. What if we need... End quote. Need what? Moravix interrupted. Need extinct monsters from a bedtime story? The Council has maintained peace for 5,000 years, through dialogue and understanding. We do not need warriors who may or may not exist. This session is concluded. The holographic displays around the chamber flickered off one by one. Representatives began filing out, some still chuckling at Kelrix's presentation. The ambassador stood alone at the podium, watching them go. Only one delegate approached him as the chamber emptied. Commander Yaleth, a 4-legged being whose species actually maintained a small defense force, placed a supportive limb on Kelrix's shoulder. I believe you saw something, Yaleth said quietly. But understand, most of them have never seen war. Their grandparents' never saw war. To them, military force is as mythical as humans. What about the Skreta? Kelrix asked. You mentioned 3 colonies. Yaleth's expression darkened. 5 now. 2 more went silent during your presentation. The Skreta are not responding to our diplomatic outreach. I have requested permission to take my fleet to investigate, but the Council wants to give peace more time. How much time do we have? Less than they think. Yaleth squeezed Kelrix's shoulder once more before leaving. Keep investigating your signals, Ambassador. I hope you are wrong about them. But I also hope you are right. Kelrix returned to his office, a modest space overlooking the Council homeworld's capital city. He had worked for 20 cycles to earn this position, to have a voice in galactic affairs. Now he had used that voice to make himself a laughingstock. But the data did not lie. He pulled up the signals again on his private terminal. They were faint. Yes. Intermittent. Certainly. But they were there. Pulsing out from the forbidden zone with a regularity that suggested intelligence. More than that, they seemed to be scanning, searching, watching the galaxy beyond their boundaries. Kelrix began cross-referencing the new signals with the oldest archives he could access. Most species had purged or encrypted their pre-council records, embarrassed by their violent pasts. But fragments remained. References to a species that fought with terrifying efficiency. Descriptions of ships that could strike and vanish. Accounts of soldiers who never, ever stopped coming. And then there was the Treaty of Terra, supposedly signed right before Earth's destruction. A mutual defense pact between the early Council and the Terran Alliance. The treaty promised that if the Council ever faced existential threat, Earth would respond to a specific beacon signal. Most historians claimed the treaty was fraudulent, created retroactively to add legitimacy to the Council's formation. The beacon coordinates pointed to empty space. The encryption keys led nowhere. Kelrix decided to check anyway. The beacon control system was buried in the oldest part of the Council's communication network. The interface looked ancient, the commands written in a dialect of galactic standard, so outdated that Kelrix had to run it through 3 translation matrices just to understand the prompts. He entered the coordinates from the treaty. The system accepted them without error. He entered the encryption key sequence. The system began a startup procedure. Kelrix's hands hovered over the activation command. If he was wrong, nothing would happen, and he would have wasted power on a useless transmission. If he was right, his terminal chimed with an urgent message. Another colony had gone silent. The Scrathi had taken 6 now. All on the outer rim. Yaleth's brief message simply read, Council. Still debating. Kelrix pressed the activation command. The beacon transmitted for 3 seconds. A burst of compressed data fired toward the quarantine zone, using quantum-entangled particles that arrived instantaneously. Then the system went dormant again, having fulfilled its programmed purpose after 10,000 years of waiting. Now what? Kelrix muttered to himself. The answer came faster than he expected. Within an hour, every sensor array in Council space detected a massive power spike from the quarantine zone. Something was moving. Something big. Kelrix's communicator exploded with calls. Council members who had laughed at him now demanded explanations. What had he done? What was happening? But the sensors fell silent again just as quickly. Whatever had activated had either shut down or moved beyond detection range. Kelrix stared at the data, his mind racing. Something had responded to the beacon. Something had been waiting for exactly that signal. Over the next 10 days, the galaxy learned the true meaning of fear. The Scrathi swarm dropped all pretense of peaceful expansion. Their fleets emerged from hidden staging areas and struck simultaneously at 20 Council worlds. The attacks were coordinated, brutal, and overwhelming. The Scrathi did not negotiate. They did not offer terms. They simply swarmed over defenses and claimed entire planets. Commander Yaleth's small fleet managed to evacuate one world before it fell, saving millions. But his force was the only military response the Council could muster. Every other species had converted their defense forces to exploration or trade vessels centuries ago. They had no weapons, no tactics, no experience with actual war. The Council chamber, once filled with confident delegates, now reeked of panic. Representatives screamed at each other, demanding solutions that nobody had. Peaceful species discovered they had no answers when peace was not an option. Morovics called for order repeatedly, their energy field flickering with stress. We must attempt diplomatic contact. There must be some demand we can meet. Some negotiation we can. They are eating our people. A delegate shrieked. The Scratha do not want territory or resources. They want biomass. They are consuming entire populations. The chamber descended into chaos. Some delegates called for immediate surrender. Others demanded impossible military solutions. A few simply wept. Kelrick stood and raised his voice above the noise. The beacon has been activated. The chamber fell silent. 10 days ago, I activated the ancient Terra beacon. Kelrix continued. If the old treaty was real, if Earth exists, they received our distress call. And, Moravix asked, their voice barely a whisper, and we wait. The treaty promised Earth would respond to existential threats against the Council. If humans are real, if they survived, they will come. And if they do not exist? Thess asked, their colors now pale with fear. Kelrix had no answer for that. The Council voted to send diplomatic envoys to the Scratha, offering everything from resources to territory to complete surrender if civilian populations would be spared. Every envoy was killed on sight, their ships torn apart and consumed. Yalith's fleet engaged the Scrathi at the Battle of Kelvin's Star, buying time for another evacuation. His ships fought bravely, using ancient tactics pulled from historical databases. They destroyed 3 Scrathi vessels before being overwhelmed. Yalith himself survived, but barely, his ship limping back to Council space with half his crew dead. 27 worlds had fallen. Billions were dead or missing. The Scrathi Armada was now within striking distance of the core Council systems. In the Council chamber, Moravix proposed one final vote: complete and unconditional surrender to the Scrathi swarm. We have no other choice, the Council leader said, their energy field dim and defeated. We tried peace. We tried military resistance. Nothing has worked. Perhaps if we submit, they will allow some of us to survive as subjects or slaves. It is better than extinction. The vote was called. One by one, delegates raised their hands in favor of surrender. Some openly wept as they voted. Others stared straight ahead, hollow-eyed. Kelrix did not raise his hand. Neither did Yalith, though the commander's injuries made it unclear if he could physically do so anymore. The vote was nearly unanimous when the alarms began. Every sensor in the chamber screamed warnings simultaneously. Massive spatial distortions detected at the edge of the system. Energy signatures unlike anything in Council databases. Ships arriving through faster-than-light jumps that created gravitational waves strong enough to detect from halfway across the galaxy. The main view screen activated automatically, showing a visual feed from the outer sensor buoys. Space itself seemed to tear open 12 times. Massive vessels emerged from the wounds in reality, sleek and dangerous, bristling with weapons that had no civilian purpose. They moved with purpose and precision, forming a battle formation in seconds. The lead ship broadcast on all frequencies. The language was harsh, guttural, incomprehensible to the translation matrix. Then it switched to perfect galactic standard, though with an accent no living being had ever heard before. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Valor, leading the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. We received your distress call. Earth remembers its commitments. Please identify your situation and the nature of the threat you face. The Council chamber remained absolutely silent. 200 species, thousands of years of civilization, countless worlds and philosophies and cultures, all frozen in shock. Humans were real. Earth existed, and they had come to help. Kelrix found his voice first. Captain Chen, this is Ambassador Kelrix of the Galactic Council. We are facing invasion by the Scratha swarm. They have conquered 27 worlds and are advancing toward our core systems. We have no effective military resistance. His voice broke slightly. We did not believe you existed until this moment. There was a pause. Then Captain Chen's response came through. And Kelrix could hear something in her voice. Not anger or judgment. Something worse. Disappointment. We know, Ambassador. We have been monitoring Council communications for millennia. We know you thought we were myths. We know you dismantled your defenses. We know you forgot how to fight. Another pause. It is fortunate, then, that we did not forget. Transmitting Scratha fleet coordinates now. We are moving to engage. The 12 human warships accelerated toward the advancing Scrathi armada with a speed that seemed to ignore the normal laws of physics. The Council had voted for surrender, but Earth had voted for war. The human warships cut through space like predators that had found their prey. Kelrix watched the tactical display in the Council chamber, barely breathing as the 12 vessels approached the Scratha forward fleet. 30 Scratha ships held position near the fourth planet, a mining colony that had been evacuated just hours before falling. They are outnumbered, Yaleth said from his medical chair. The commander's wounds were still being treated by floating medical drones, but he had refused to leave the chamber. 30 to 12. The Scrathi vessels are larger. This is suicide. But the humans did not slow down. Captain Chen's voice came through the comm system again. Council forces, maintain your position. We will handle initial contact. We need to assess Scratha capabilities. Captain, Moravix responded, their energy field brightening slightly with desperate hope. We can provide what little tactical data we have gathered. The Scratha use swarming tactics. They overwhelm through numbers and coordinated strikes. Their ships have organic hulls that can partially regenerate damage. They received and acknowledged, Council Leader, stand by. The human fleet split into 3 groups of 4 ships each. They did not maintain the tight defensive formations that Council species preferred. Instead, they spread out, creating a wide net that seemed to invite attack. The Scratha took the bait. 15 Scratha vessels broke from their position and accelerated toward the nearest human group. The insects' ships were ugly things, grown rather than built, with irregular surfaces that pulsed with bioluminescence. They moved like actual insects, darting and weaving unpredictably. The human ships waited until the Scratha were committed to their attack vector. Then they moved. Kelrix had never seen ships maneuver like that. The human vessels spun, rolled, and accelerated in directions that should have torn them apart from the G-forces alone. They did not just dodge the Scrathi's organic projectile weapons. They seemed to predict them, moving before the shots were fired. Then the humans returned fire. Weapons that the Council did not have names for tore into the Scratha formation. Brilliant beams of coherent light that burned through organic hulls. Kinetic projectiles that moved at percentages of light speed. Missiles that changed direction mid-flight to chase their targets. And something else, some kind of electromagnetic pulse that caused the Scratha ships to spasm and lose coordination. Within 90 seconds, 5 Scrathi vessels were drifting wrecks. Within 3 minutes, all 15 attackers were destroyed or disabled. The remaining Scrath ships did not press the attack. They held position, apparently reassessing their enemy. The human fleet regrouped with casual efficiency. Not a single vessel had been destroyed. Only one showed any damage at all, and it was minor scoring on the hull plating. Sweet, merciful ancestors, Thess whispered, their colors shifting through expressions of shock and awe. They did not just survive. They dominated. Captain Chen's voice returned. Council Leader Moravix, we need strategic intelligence. What are the Scratha's supply lines? Where is their main fleet? How many worlds have they taken? And what is their rate of expansion? Moravix pulled together the data quickly, transmitting everything the Council had gathered. Our projections suggest a total fleet size of at least 3,000 vessels, possibly more. They have been expanding at a rate of 3 systems per week. We do not know where their home territory is. They appeared suddenly on our borders 6 months ago. 3,000, Chen repeated. Her voice remained calm. We brought 12 ships. Request permission to contact Earth for reinforcements. Granted. Moravik said immediately. Absolutely granted. What do you need? How can we help? Just stay out of our way and keep your civilians safe. We will handle the military situation. Chen out. The human ships began accelerating toward the inner system, where the Skratha had landed ground forces on the mining colony. Kelrix watched them go, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. Yalith laughed suddenly, a pained but genuine sound. They have been alone for 10,000 years, preparing, training, building weapons while we built gardens. Do you understand what that means? No, Kelrix admitted. It means they never forgot the galaxy was dangerous. They never assumed peace would last forever. They kept their teeth sharp while we filed ours down to nothing. Yalith's expression turned serious. I am grateful they are on our side, because I would not want to face them as enemies. Over the next week, the galaxy watched in amazement as 12 human ships systematically dismantled the Skrethi forward fleet. The humans fought with tactics that seemed insane until they worked perfectly. They used the local star's gravity to slingshot into attack positions. They hid in asteroid fields and ambushed Skrethi patrols. They sent out false signals to split enemy formations, then destroyed the separated groups individually. But what truly terrified the watching council members was the humans' willingness to take risks that no sane species would consider. They flew through debris fields at speeds that gave them milliseconds to react. They used near-suicidal ramming attacks with drone ships packed with explosives. One human vessel deliberately vented its atmosphere to put out a fire while still engaging the enemy. They fight like they have nothing to lose, Thess observed during one battle briefing. Like they have already accepted they might die. Kelrix, who had been studying human transmissions and the ancient archives, shook his head. No. They fight like death is simply one possible outcome. Not the worst one. The worst outcome, to them, is failing to protect those they defend. Captain Chen had agreed to host Kelrix aboard the Valor as an official council observer. The ambassador had jumped at the chance, desperate to understand these beings who had emerged from myth. The Valor's interior was shockingly utilitarian compared to council vessels. No artistic sculptures. No comfortable meditation spaces. No carefully balanced environmental systems for aesthetic appeal. Everything served a purpose. Every corridor could be sealed and pressurized independently. Every room had emergency equipment. Even the walls were reinforced, designed to contain fires or hull breaches. This was not a ship built for comfort. It was built to survive. Captain Chen met Kelrix in what she called the Combat Information Center. Dozens of humans worked at stations, monitoring everything from weapon systems to engineering to communications. They moved with practiced efficiency, speaking in clipped military jargon that the translation matrix struggled with. Chen herself was a surprise. Kelrix had expected someone large and intimidating. Instead, she was shorter than him, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style and intelligent eyes that seemed to measure everything they saw. She wore a blue uniform with various insignias that Kelrix did not understand. Ambassador Kelrix, she said, shaking his hand in the human greeting gesture he had researched. Welcome aboard the Valor. I apologize for the utilitarian accommodations. We were not expecting to host guests. Captain Chen, I am honored to be here. I have so many questions, and I will answer what I can. But first, I need your help. She gestured to a large display, showing the local sector. Red markers indicated Skratha-controlled systems. Blue markers showed council territory. Yellow markers showed contested zones. We have destroyed or disabled 40% of the Skratha forward fleet, Chen continued. But long-range sensors show more ships arriving from deeper in their territory. Many more. We estimate at least 1,000 vessels are now heading toward this sector. Kelrix felt his hope crumble. 1,000! Captain, you have performed miracles with 12 ships, but surely, we called for reinforcements 6 days ago. They will arrive in approximately 70 hours. But I need to know where to position them. Where are the Skratha most vulnerable? Which systems are most critical to defend? What can you tell me about their psychology and tactics? Kelrix shared everything the council had learned, which felt pitifully inadequate. The Scratha did not communicate, except through action. They seemed to have a hive mind structure, coordinating across vast distances. Individual ships would sacrifice themselves, without hesitation, if it benefited the swarm. They had no honor, no rules, no apparent emotion except hunger. Chen listened carefully, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed a military mind that thought 3 moves ahead. When Kelrix finished, she nodded slowly. They are not so different from some Earth species. Army ants, locust swarms, piranhas. We have dealt with collective intelligences before, just on a smaller scale. How did you defeat them on Earth? Kelrix asked. Chen smiled grimly. We did not defeat them, Ambassador. We learned to respect them and avoid them when possible. When avoidance was not possible, we used overwhelming force at key pressure points. Find the queen, destroy the nest, disrupt the pheromone trails, apply the right pressure in the right place, and even the largest swarm will collapse. You think the Screethi have a central control point? Everything with a hive mind does. The question is whether we can find it before they overwhelm us with numbers. Chen pulled up a star chart. These are the systems they conquered first. The expansion pattern suggests they came from this general region. We need reconnaissance deep in Scratha space. We need to find their home. That would be a suicide mission, Kelrix said quietly. Yes, Chen agreed. Which is why I am going personally. The Valor is the fastest ship in our fleet. We have stealth systems that might let us penetrate their territory undetected. Might. You would risk yourself? The fleet commander? Chen looked at him with an expression he was beginning to recognize. It was the look of someone who had made a difficult choice and accepted the consequences. Ambassador. Humans have a saying, never ask someone to do something you would not do yourself. If I want my people to risk their lives, I need to be willing to risk mine. That is not heroism. It is simply leadership. Before Kelrix could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. A tactical officer called out, Captain! Multiple contacts emerging from FTL. Scrathy signatures. It's the main fleet, ma'am. They are arriving early. The display updated with hundreds of red markers appearing at the edge of the system. Kelrix felt his legs weaken. So many. Too many. But Captain Chen simply nodded, as if she had expected this. Battle stations. Signal the fleet to form defensive formation. Delta 7. Prepare for extended engagement. She turned to Kelrix. Ambassador, I need you to go to the observation deck. You will be safer there, and I need to focus on the battle. Captain, there are too many. You need to retreat. Wait for your reinforcements, and let them reach the Council homeworlds unopposed? No, Ambassador. We will hold here. We will make them pay for every meter of space. And when our reinforcements arrive. She smiled, and it was not a kind expression. When our reinforcements arrive, the Scrathe will learn what happens when you threaten Earth's allies. Kelrix was escorted to the observation deck by a young human who introduced herself as Lieutenant Park. Through the transparent hull plating, he could see the human fleet forming up. 12 ships against the incoming hundreds. Are you not afraid? Kelrix asked her. Park considered the question seriously. Yes, sir. I am terrified. But fear is not the same as cowardice. Fear is just your brain telling you the situation is dangerous. What matters is what you do with that fear. And what will you do? My job, sir. Same as everyone else on this ship. The Scratha fleet began its attack, and the battle that would later be called the Stand at Kelvin's Star began in earnest. The human ships fought with desperate courage, their weapons never stopping. They used every trick, every tactic, every advantage they could create, but the numbers were overwhelming. One by one, the human ships took damage. The destroyer Vengeance lost its main engines and had to fight while drifting. The cruiser Defiance hull was breached in 3 places. The frigate Swift took a direct hit to its reactor and had to perform an emergency shutdown, leaving it defenseless. Kelrix watched in horror as the Scratha closed in. This was it. The end. The humans had fought bravely, but courage could not overcome such odds. And then space tore open again. Not 12 ships this time. Hundreds. Thousands. The entire display filled with blue markers as the Terran Defense Fleet arrived early, having pushed their FTL drives beyond safe limits to reach the battle in time. A new voice came over the communications channel, deep and authoritative. This is Admiral Marcus Rivera, commanding the Terran Second Fleet. Captain Chen, you have done outstanding work. We will take it from here. All ships, weapons free. Show these bugs why humanity earned its reputation. The Scratha suddenly found themselves facing not a desperate last stand, but a fully prepared military force that outnumbered and outgunned them completely. What had been an assured victory turned into a rout within minutes. Kelrix watched the battle turn, watched the Scratha fleet attempt to retreat, watched the human armada pursue them relentlessly. He turned to Lieutenant Park, who had tears streaming down her face as she watched her fellow ships being rescued. Your species, Kelrix said softly, should terrify me. But instead, I feel the safest I have felt in months. Park wiped her eyes and smiled. That is the point, sir. We are only terrifying to your enemies. To our friends, we are just stubborn fools who refuse to abandon people who need help. The Battle of Kelvin's Star ended with complete Scratha defeat. The swarm had lost over 600 vessels. The humans had lost none, though many required extensive repairs. But everyone knew this was not the end. The Scratha would return with even more ships. The real war was just beginning, and this time, the galaxy had remembered how to fight back. The war room aboard the orbital station above the Council homeworld had transformed from a place of debate into an actual military headquarters. Holographic displays showed real-time battle data from 17 active fronts. Human officers worked alongside Council representatives, teaching them the basics of warfare that their species had forgotten. Ambassador Kelrix had effectively abandoned his diplomatic duties to become a student of human military doctrine. He spent his days watching battles, interviewing soldiers, and trying to understand how humans approached conflict so differently from every other species in the galaxy. Today, he was observing a tactical briefing led by Commander Jackson Hayes, a human with silver hair and scars that suggested he had seen many battles before this one. The briefing covered the recent Battle of Meridian Station, where a human strike force had defeated a Scratha fleet 3 times their size. The key, Hayes explained to the assembled council officers, was making them think we were retreating. We showed them our backs, acted panicked, transmitted false damage reports, they sensed weakness and pursued aggressively. But you were leading them into an asteroid field, Yalith observed. The commander had recovered from his injuries and was now learning everything he could from the humans. You used the terrain against them. Exactly. We knew the asteroid's orbits. They did not. When they followed us in, we had positioned drone ships with magnetic harpoons on the larger rocks. We caught them in a crossfire between our fleet and the automated weapons, with nowhere to maneuver. Hayes smiled. They expected honor and fair combat. We gave them an ambush. A crystalline delegate named Serix raised a translucent hand. Commander, I do not understand. Is this not dishonorable? Our ancient codes of warfare spoke of meeting enemies face to face, of challenging them properly. Hayes's expression hardened. Delegate Serix, with respect, those codes are why you lost 27 worlds before we arrived. Honor is a luxury you can only afford when both sides agree to the rules. The Scratha do not care about honor. They care about consuming your populations and expanding their territory. You can be honorable in a grave, or you can be practical and survive. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Kelrix watched the council members process this harsh truth. They had built a civilization on principles of fair play and mutual respect. The humans were teaching them that survival sometimes required abandoning those principles. But surely there are limits. Syrinx pressed. Lines you will not cross? Lines you will not cross? Of course, Hayes agreed. We do not target civilians. We do not use biological weapons that cannot be controlled. We do not torture prisoners. We do not commit genocide. But between those lines, we do whatever works. We lie to the enemy. We use their psychology against them. We make them afraid. Fear is a weapon, and we wield it expertly. After the briefing, Kelrix followed Hayes to the observation deck. The human commander stood looking out at the fleet, assembling below. Dozens of Terran warships preparing for the next offensive. You think we are barbaric, Hayes said without looking at Kelrix. It was not a question. I think you are effective, Kelrix replied carefully. I think you have saved us. But I also think your methods frighten me. Good. They should frighten you. Hayes turned to face him. Ambassador, humanity spent 10,000 years alone out there. We expanded slowly, carefully, watching the rest of the galaxy. We saw you all disarm. We saw you forget that the universe is not inherently safe. We hoped you would never need us. But you prepared anyway. We prepared for the worst. We built fleets. We war-gamed scenarios. We trained every generation in the art of warfare, not because we wanted to fight, but because we knew someday something would come, something that did not care about peace or dialogue or fairness. Hayes gestured at the Scratha-controlled territories on a nearby display. And we were right. Kelrix absorbed this. How do you live with it? The violence? The death? One side. The tween. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. We remember what it is for. Every ship we destroy, every Scrathy we kill, we do it to protect people who cannot protect themselves. That is not murder, Ambassador. That is defense of the innocent. That is the only thing that lets me sleep at night. Far from the Council homeworld, in the dark spaces between stars, a different kind of understanding was developing. Hive Commander ZX Thor had survived 17 battles against the humans. This was an achievement, as few Scrathy ships survived even one engagement with the mythical species. ZX Thor had earned unique status within the swarm, becoming the closest thing the Scratha had to an expert on their enemy. The humans confused the Scratha hive mind. They did not behave like other species. They did not follow predictable patterns. Each human ship seemed to have its own initiative, its own creativity, while still coordinating with the larger fleet. It was like fighting a swarm that was also individuals, a contradiction that the Scrathy struggled to comprehend. ZX Thor studied the captured human equipment in the analysis chamber. The swarm had managed to salvage one human escape pod from a damaged destroyer. Inside, they had found bodies, equipment, and most valuable of all, data storage. The data showed humans at war with themselves, massive conflicts that had killed millions of their own species, weapons that could destroy entire cities, hatreds that lasted generations. The Scrathae expected this to make humans weak, divided, easy to predict. Instead, it made them more dangerous. Humans had learned warfare by fighting themselves. They had tested every tactic, every strategy, every weapon against enemies who thought like them. They had evolved their combat doctrine through centuries of brutal internal conflict. By the time they faced the Scrathy, they had already mastered every lesson warfare could teach. They are not one mind, ZX Thor reported to the primary hive consciousness. They are billions of minds that choose to work together. Each one is dangerous alone. Together, they are unstoppable. The hive mind processed this information. It was disturbing. The Scratha had always defeated other species, because the swarm coordinated better than any group of individuals could. But humans had found a way to combine individual creativity with collective purpose. We must adapt, Ziexthor concluded. We must learn their methods, or we will lose this war. Aboard the human carrier ship Titan, Kelrix had been granted permission to interview members of the Marine Corps. These were the humans who boarded enemy vessels and fought in close quarters, the ones who took the most risks. Sergeant Maria Gonzalez met him in the training bay, where Marines were practicing combat maneuvers in zero gravity. She was shorter than Kelrix, but moved with such confidence that she seemed to dominate the space around her. "Ambassador," she greeted him with a nod. "Heard you wanted to know why we are crazy enough to board Scrathy ships. I am trying to understand human psychology," Kelrix admitted. "Your willingness to enter close combat seems almost suicidal." "Ever one," Gonzalez laughed. "Yeah, it kind of is. But someone has to do it. The Scrathy adapt fast. If we just shoot them from a distance, they learn to counter our weapons. But if we board their ships, we can gather intelligence, destroy critical systems from inside, and create fear. The Scratha are starting to abandon ships when they detect boarding pods. They are learning that humans inside their vessels means death. But you risk death every time. Sure. But here is the thing, Ambassador. Every Marine in this unit volunteered. Not just for the Corps, but specifically for boarding actions. We knew the risks. We accepted them, because we believe in what we are fighting for. And what is that? Gonzalez's expression turned serious. Simple. We are fighting so species like yours can keep living in peace. We are fighting so children can grow up without knowing the fear of invasion. We are the monsters who fight monsters, so decent people do not have to become what we are. Kelrix felt something shift in his understanding. You see yourselves as monsters? Sometimes. We do terrible things in war, Ambassador. We kill. We destroy. We cause pain and suffering. The fact that we do it for good reasons does not change the reality of it. But someone has to be willing to do those terrible things, or the actual monsters win. So we volunteer to carry that burden. Over the following weeks, Kelrix witnessed human military psychology in action. He watched as they celebrated victories, but also mourned losses. He saw them honor fallen enemies in strange ceremonies where they acknowledged the courage of Scratha who had fought well. He observed their discipline, their dark humor in the face of danger, their fierce loyalty to each other. He also saw their capacity for mercy. A small Scrathy vessel, damaged and helpless, was captured instead of destroyed. The few surviving Scrathy were imprisoned, but treated well. The humans studied them, learned from them, and when they could extract no more intelligence, they kept them alive in clean, comfortable cells. Why not kill them? A council delegate asked Admiral Rivera during a strategy meeting. They would show you no mercy. Could. Number. Why? Because we are not them? Rivera replied simply. The moment we start behaving like the Scrathy, we lose the moral authority to fight them. We must be better than our enemies, or there is no point in winning. But the humans also showed no hesitation when violence was necessary. When a Scratha force attacked a refugee convoy, the human response was swift and brutal. 3 entire Scratha fleets were hunted down and destroyed without mercy. The message was clear. Attack civilians, and humanity would show you what true warfare looked like. The galaxy was learning that humans existed in a strange contradiction. They were capable of great kindness and terrible violence, often in the same day. They built hospitals on conquered worlds while bombing military targets. They shared food with starving populations while destroying supply convoys. They were gentle with children and merciless with soldiers. Kelrix tried to explain this to Moravix during a private meeting. They call it controlled aggression. They train themselves to turn violence on and off like a switch. They can be peaceful diplomats one moment and ruthless warriors the next. It sounds unstable, Moravix observed. It is disciplined. That is what makes it so effective. They do not fight from rage or hatred. They fight from choice. With clear objectives, and they can stop fighting just as decisively as they start. The turning point came at the Battle of Hell's Gate Nebula. A massive Scrathy force had gathered to push toward the Council core worlds. The human fleet was outnumbered 2-1. Conventional tactics would have meant certain defeat, so the humans did not use conventional tactics. They positioned their fleet inside the nebula, using the ionized gases to hide their numbers and positions. They broadcast false signals to make the Scratha think the main fleet was elsewhere. They deployed thousands of mines disguised as space debris. They even used the nebula's exotic radiation to overload Scratha's sensors at critical moments. The Scrathi entered the nebula confidently, expecting an easy victory. Instead, they stumbled into a nightmare of ambushes, traps, and misdirection. Human ships appeared from nowhere, struck hard, and vanished before the Scratha could respond. The ionized gases hid human movements, while the Scratha blundered around half-blind. Hive Commander ZX Thor, leading one of the Scrathi fleets, finally understood. The humans were not just fighting. They were teaching a lesson. They were demonstrating that in warfare, intelligence and creativity mattered more than numbers. They were showing the Scrathi that this war would not be won through simple force. When the battle ended, the Scratha had lost 60% of their ships. The humans had lost 8 vessels, a ratio that should have been impossible. But more importantly, the Scrathi learned fear. For the first time, Scrathi commanders began avoiding combat. Ships retreated rather than pressing attacks. The swarm, which had seemed unstoppable, began to hesitate. In the aftermath, Kelrix found Captain Chen standing alone in an observation room, looking at the wreckage floating in space. Both human and Scratha debris drifted together, silent testimony to the cost of war. 8 ships, Chen said quietly. 1,600 people. I knew every captain's name. Some of them were friends. You won a great victory, Kelrix offered. I know. But victory still hurts, Ambassador. It still costs. Anyone who tells you differently has never actually won anything that mattered. She turned to face him, and Kelrix saw exhaustion in her eyes. We fight because we must. We win because we are good at it. But we never forget what we are paying for those victories. How do you continue? Because stopping would make their sacrifice meaningless. Because giving up would betray everyone who trusted us to protect them. Because someone has to stand against the darkness. And we chose to be those people. Chen managed a small smile. Besides, we are winning. The Scrathi are learning that humanity does not lose. We endure. We adapt. We outlast. That is what we do best. That night, Kelrix wrote in his journal, trying to capture what he had learned. Humans were not invincible. They were not fearless. They were not perfect warriors. They were simply willing to do whatever necessary to protect those they had sworn to defend. They combined creativity with discipline, mercy with ruthlessness, hope with practical reality. They were exactly what the galaxy needed, even if the galaxy had not known it until they arrived. But Kelrix also noted something troubling. The Scratha were adapting. They were learning from their defeats. And somewhere out there, beyond the current battle lines, the true Scratha home fleet was gathering. The real test was still to come. The message from Captain Chen was brief and direct. She requested permission to contact Earth for massive reinforcements. The council chamber fell silent as Moravix read the details. The humans estimated they would need at least 500 additional warships to push deep into Scratha territory and find their homeworld. 500 ships seemed impossible. The current human fleet of 200 vessels was already the largest military force the Council had ever witnessed. Could Earth possibly have more? Permission granted, Moravix said immediately. What will you need from us? Staging areas for supply and repair, Admiral Rivera responded from his flagship. And stay out of our way while we work. No offense intended, Council Leader, but your people are not ready for what comes next. Kelrix watched as Captain Chen transmitted the request through quantum communications that reached Earth instantaneously. The response came back within an hour, and when it arrived, every sensor in Council space registered it. Space did not just tear open in a few places. It ripped apart in hundreds of locations simultaneously. Kelrix stood in the Council observation deck, watching through the windows, as humanity revealed its true strength. They did not send 500 ships. They sent 2,000. Battleships that dwarfed anything currently in the war zone. Carriers launching hundreds of fighter craft. Cruisers bristling with weapons. Destroyers moving in coordinated wolf packs. Support vessels carrying supplies for months of sustained combat. And floating among them, massive construction ships, ready to build forward bases in conquered territory. "Dear ancestors," Thess whispered, their colors cycling through expressions of awe and terror. How? How did they build so many? Admiral Rivera's voice came over the communications channel, answering the unspoken question. The Council has 200 inhabited systems. Earth alone has colonized 600. We have shipyards orbiting dead stars, automated factories on barren moons, mining operations in resource-rich asteroid belts. We have been preparing for this for 10,000 years. This is not our full strength, Council Leader. This is just what we can spare without leaving our own territory undefended. Kelrix felt his legs weaken. 600 systems? The humans had built an empire in secret, while the Council thought they were extinct. They had turned their supposed isolation into the greatest military buildup in galactic history. Why? Moravix asked, their voice barely a whisper. Why prepare so extensively if you intended peace? Because history taught us that peace is not the natural state of the universe. Admiral Rivera replied. Peace is something you build and defend. We hoped we would never need this fleet. We prayed the galaxy would remain peaceful forever. But we prepared for the reality that it might not. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. That is the human way. The combined human fleet numbered over 2,200 warships. It was the largest military armada ever assembled in known galactic history, and it was all focused on a single objective: finding and destroying the Skratha homeworld. Captain Chen held a final strategy briefing aboard the Valor before the offensive began. Kelrix attended along with selected Council observers and human commanders. The holographic display showed the Skratha-controlled territories in detail, with projected locations for their main fleet. We have been fighting the outer edges of the swarm, Chen explained. Local forces, forward bases, expansion fleets. But somewhere in here, she highlighted a region of space 300 light-years across, is their home system. The Queen, the central coordination, whatever controls the hive mind. We find it, we destroy it, we end this war. Commander Hayes leaned forward, studying the map. Problem is, they know we are coming. They have had time to fortify. We could be looking at thousands of ships defending their home system, then we bring thousands of our own, Admiral Rivera said grimly. This stops being a limited engagement. This becomes total war. We push through everything they have until we reach the heart of the swarm. Yalith, who had been learning human tactics for weeks, raised a limb hesitantly. They have sent envoys to 3 separate Council worlds offering peace talks. The human officers exchanged glances. Several smiled, but not with humor. Of course they have, Chen said. That is what you do when you are losing. You ask for negotiations to buy time to regroup. It is one of the oldest tricks in the book. Chen said, but how can you be certain? A Council delegate asked. Perhaps they genuinely want peace? Because if they wanted peace, they would have offered it before we started winning, Rivera replied. Real peace comes from mutual respect or exhaustion. The Skratha are not exhausted yet, and they certainly do not respect the Council. This is a delaying tactic, nothing more. Moravix appeared on the display from the Council homeworld. Regardless of human suspicions, we must pursue diplomatic options. The Council has voted to accept the Skratha offer for peace talks. We request that humanity honor a temporary ceasefire during negotiations. The silence in the briefing room was heavy. Kelrix watched the human faces cycle through expressions of disbelief, frustration, and resignation. Council leader, Admiral Rivera said carefully, "I strongly advise against this. The Scrathe are using your own principles of peaceful dialogue against you. Every day of ceasefire gives them time to consolidate their forces. That may be true, Admiral, but we must try. If there is even a small chance to end this war without more bloodshed, we must take it." Moravix's energy field dimmed. Apologetically, "I am sorry, but the Council has made its decision. We request that human forces honor the ceasefire. And if we refuse?" Chen asked quietly. "Then you risk becoming what you claim to fight against. Warmongers who prefer violence to peace. Please, Captain, trust us on this." The channel closed. Admiral Rivera turned to his officers with an expression of barely controlled anger. "They are going to get themselves killed. The Scrathe will use this ceasefire to position their forces for a knockout blow." "Can we defy the Council?" Hayes asked. "Continue the offensive anyway?" "No," Chen said, though the words seemed to pain her. "We came here at the Council's request. If we ignore their authority now, we become conquerors, not allies. We have to honor their wishes, even when those wishes are suicidal." "So what do we do?" Chen studied the map carefully. "We honor the ceasefire. But we use the time to position our fleet in the most advantageous locations possible. We run reconnaissance. We prepare for the inevitable attack. And when the Scrathe show their true intentions, we hit them so hard they will never recover." The ceasefire began with great fanfare from the Council. News broadcasts celebrated the return of diplomacy. Citizens began to believe the war might actually end peacefully. Council delegates spoke eloquently about the power of dialogue over violence. The human fleet simply prepared. Kelrix spent the ceasefire period aboard the Valor, watching the humans work. They did not celebrate the peace. They did not relax. If anything, they became more focused, more intense. Every ship ran constant drills. Marines trained even harder. Engineers reinforced shields and upgraded weapons. "You really do not trust the Scrathe," Kelrix observed to Lieutenant Park during one of his tours. "Would you?" Park replied. "Ambassador, in human history, we have seen this pattern 100 times. The losing side calls for peace talks. The winning side agrees out of honor or exhaustion. And then the losing side uses the pause to launch a surprise attack. It happened at Munich in 1938. It happened during the North American Resource Wars of 2087. It happened at the Siege of Beijing during the Asian unification conflicts. History is a harsh teacher, and we learned this lesson well. But what if you are wrong? What if the Scrathe genuinely want peace? Then we will have wasted some time preparing for a battle that never comes. I can live with that. But if we are right, and we are not prepared, millions of Council civilians will die. Can you live with that? I'm one. 8. I'm line. Kelrix could not answer. The peace talks took place on a neutral station at the edge of Council space. The Scrathe sent a delegation in an unarmed ship. The Council sent their finest diplomats. The humans sent observers, including Captain Chen, who attended under protest. Kelrix was part of the Council delegation. He watched the Scrathe representatives carefully. They were smaller than the warriors, with more refined features and the ability to speak galactic standard through translation devices. The swarm wishes to end hostilities. The lead Scrathe diplomat said, "We have come to understand that the Council is protected by powerful allies. We propose a division of territory. You keep your core worlds, we keep what we have claimed. Both sides benefit from peace." And it sounded reasonable. Several Council delegates nodded enthusiastically. But Kelrix noticed Captain Chen's expression grow darker with every word. "What about the populations you have already consumed?" Chen asked suddenly. The Scrathe delegate tilted its head. They are gone. We cannot return them, but we offer to cease expansion. No more council worlds will fall. And human territory? Chen pressed. Will you agree to leave Earth's colonies alone? Of course. We have no interest in conflict with humanity. Chen smiled, and Kelrix recognized it as the expression she wore before ordering an attack. Then why have you been moving your main fleet toward the Council homeworld during this ceasefire? Why have you been building fortifications around strategic jump points? Why have you positioned invasion forces near 3 undefended Council systems? The Scrathy delegates froze. The Council representatives looked confused. Captain Chen, what are you talking about? Moravix demanded. Chen pulled up sensor data on the briefing room display. We have been running reconnaissance, despite the ceasefire. The Scrathy have used this time to position their forces for a massive offensive. They never intended to negotiate. They intended to use our honor against us. The Scratha delegates did not deny it. They simply attacked. The unarmed ship had not been unarmed at all. Weapons deployed from hidden compartments. The Scratha delegates transformed, their bodies shifting into combat forms with natural weapons. But Chen had expected this. The human security team responded instantly, their weapons already drawn. The brief firefight ended with all Scratha delegates dead and only minor injuries to the human guards. All ships, this is Chen, the captain broadcast on emergency channels. The ceasefire is over. Repeat. The ceasefire is over. Scrathy are attacking. All human vessels move to pre-positioned battle stations. This is not a drill. The ambush failed because the humans had prepared for it. When the Scratha fleet emerged from hiding to attack the Council homeworld, they found the human armada already in position. Weapons hot. Shields up. The battle for the Council homeworld was the largest engagement of the war. Over 3,000 Scratha vessels against 2,200 human ships. The Council Defense Forces, what little remained, tried to help but were swept aside in the opening minutes. The humans fought with a fury that even Kelrix had not seen before. They had been forced to sit idle while the Council pursued peace talks they knew were fake. They had been forced to watch the Scrathy prepare for treachery. Now they channeled that frustration into devastating attacks. Admiral Rivera coordinated the fleet with cold precision. Battle Group Alpha. Engage their left flank. Bravo. Protect the civilian evacuation corridors. Charlie. With me. We are going straight at their command ship. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ships exploded. Lives ended. The space around the Council homeworld became a graveyard of debris and frozen bodies. But the humans would not yield. They fought with the desperation of species that knew what was at stake. Not just territory or pride, but the survival of billions of innocent people. They pushed themselves beyond normal limits, beyond what should have been possible. Kelrix watched from the orbital station as a human destroyer, already heavily damaged, rammed directly into a Scratha command carrier, destroying both vessels. He watched as Marines boarded hostile ships and fought even after their own ships were destroyed. He watched as pilots launched from doomed carriers, determined to get in one more strike before death claimed them. And slowly, impossibly, the tide turned. The Scrathae began to retreat. Their coordination broke down. Individual ships fled, rather than continue the fight. The massive assault that should have overwhelmed the Council homeworld had instead broken against human determination. When the battle ended, the Scratha had lost over 2,000 ships. The humans had lost 300. It was a brutal exchange, but a clear victory. Admiral Rivera's voice came over the open channels, broadcast to both human and Council forces. This is why we prepare for war. This is why we maintain our weapons, even when others call us paranoid. This is why Earth never forgot how to fight. Because the universe is full of species like the Scrathe, who see kindness as weakness and peace as opportunity. We are the shield that protects the peaceful. We are the sword that strikes the wicked. And we will never, ever, stop defending those who cannot defend themselves. In the aftermath, Moravix visited Captain Chen aboard the Valor. The council leader looked diminished, their energy field flickering weakly. "You were right," Moravix admitted. "About everything. The Skratha played us perfectly. If not for human preparation, we would have been destroyed." "Yes," Chen said simply. She did not gloat or lecture. She was too tired for that. "I thought I was choosing peace," Moravix continued. "I thought giving dialogue a chance was the moral choice." "It was," Chen said, surprising Kelrix. "In a better universe, peace talks would have worked. Diplomacy is always worth trying. Your mistake was not pursuing peace, council leader. Your mistake was being unprepared for when peace failed." "Can you forgive us for doubting you?" Chen considered this. "There is nothing to forgive. You are civilians trying to understand warfare. That is not a crime. But please, learn from this. Peace is precious, but it is not free. It must be defended. And sometimes, the only way to preserve peace is to be extremely good at war." The human fleet prepared for the final push. The Skrathi were broken, but not destroyed. Their homeworld remained hidden. But now, humanity was coming with the full weight of their military might. The galaxy would finally see what Earth had become during its 10,000 years of isolation. And the Skratha would learn what happens when you threaten Earth's allies. The remnants of the Skratha fleet retreated deep into their territory, leaving behind a trail of damaged ships and desperate signals. The human armada pursued relentlessly, pushing forward through systems that had been Skratha-controlled for months. Every conquered world revealed the same horror. Populations consumed, resources stripped, entire civilizations reduced to organic material for the swarm. Kelrix accompanied the human fleet on their advance, documenting everything. He had become more than an observer. He was now a historian, recording the moment when the galaxy learned to fight back against its nightmares. Captain Chen stood in the Valor's Combat Information Center, studying the latest reconnaissance data. Her crew had been working non-stop for 3 weeks, pushing themselves to exhaustion and beyond. Dark circles marked everyone's eyes. The smell of recycled air and human sweat filled every corridor. "We are close," Commander Hayes reported, pointing to a region of space on the display. "Long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures here. In the Verac system, power readings consistent with a population in the billions. It has to be their homeworld." Admiral Rivera joined them via holographic projection. His flagship, the Indomitable, was leading Battle Group Alpha on a parallel course. "Drone reconnaissance confirms it. We are looking at a fully fortified system. Orbital defense platforms, minefield barriers, and at least 1,500 Skratha warships. They have pulled back everything they have left to make a final stand." 1,500 ships, Chen repeated quietly. "Against our remaining 1,900. The odds are closer than I like, but still in our favor," Hayes pointed out. "Numerically, yes, but they are defending their home. That changes the psychological equation. They will fight with desperation." Chen looked at the tactical display, her military mind already calculating angles and approaches. "We need to be smart about this. One final push, overwhelming force, no mercy." Yalith, who had earned a position as a liaison officer on the human fleet, spoke up hesitantly. "Captain, what will you do when you reach their homeworld? Will you destroy the entire population?" The question hung in the air. Every human officer present knew what was being asked. They had come to end the Skratha threat permanently. But did that mean genocide? Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Commander Yalith, humanity has a complicated history with the concept of total war. We have committed atrocities. We have also shown mercy. What we do at the Skratha homeworld will depend on what we find there. If there are civilians, non-combatants, young who had no choice in their species' actions, we will do our best to spare them. But if the entire species is a military force, If every Scrathy is a warrior, then we will do what is necessary to protect the galaxy. And if you are not sure, Yalith pressed, if you cannot tell the difference, then we err on the side of caution and accept a harder fight rather than kill potential innocents. That is what separates us from the Scratha, Commander. We struggle with these decisions. We lose sleep over them. We do not take lives easily. If it comes down to choosing between Scrathy survival and Council survival, I will choose the Council every time. That is what they sent us here to do. The human fleet arrived at the edge of the Varrock system 12 hours later. The Scrathy were ready for them, their defenses layered and clearly visible. It was almost as if they wanted the humans to see what they faced, to understand the price of continuing the attack. Admiral Rivera opened a channel to all human ships. His voice was calm, measured, but carried an undertone of steel that Kelrix had learned to recognize. All ships, this is Admiral Rivera. Today, we face the final battle of this war. The enemy is before us, defending their home. They will fight harder than they have ever fought. They will use every trick, every tactic, every ounce of courage they possess. And we will still defeat them. Not because we are better people, not because our cause is more just, but because we are human. And humans do not lose when the stakes are this high. We do not quit. We do not surrender. We do not back down. Today, we end the Scratha threat forever. All ships, advance. And may whatever gods watch over us, grant us victory. The fleet moved forward as one, a wall of steel and determination advancing into the teeth of the enemy's strongest defenses. The Battle of Varrock system began with the Scrathy orbital platforms opening fire at maximum range. Energy beams and kinetic projectiles filled the space between the fleets. The human point defense systems worked frantically, intercepting what they could, absorbing what they could not avoid. The first human ships to die were destroyers on the outer edges of the formation. They had known they were the most exposed, had volunteered for the position. Their sacrifice allowed the main fleet to advance. Then the human fleet returned fire. And the Scratha learned what true firepower looked like. The massive human battleships, which had been held in reserve until now, unleashed their main weapons. Particle beams that could cut through orbital platforms like a knife through paper. Railguns that fired projectiles at appreciable fractions of light speed. Missiles that tracked their targets through impossible maneuvers. One by one, the Scratha defense platforms died. The Scratha fleet surged forward to meet the human advance. This was not the cautious approach they had used in earlier battles. This was a desperate charge, throwing everything they had at the invaders. Captain Chen watched the tactical display, her crew calling out status reports in the controlled chaos of combat. Concentrate fire on their command ships. Take out their coordination. Break their formation. But the Scrathy had learned from their defeats. Their command ships stayed hidden in the mass of regular vessels, protected by layers of disposable fighters. The swarm was adapting, using human tactics against them. They are learning, Hayes observed grimly. They are actually learning. Then we teach them one more lesson, Chen replied. She opened a channel to the marine assault ships. Boarding teams. Prepare for deployment. We are going to hit them where they do not expect it. The marine assault ships were smaller, faster vessels designed for one purpose, getting soldiers onto enemy ships. They launched in waves, dodging through the chaos of the main battle, targeting the largest Scrathy vessels. Sergeant Maria Gonzalez led the first boarding team onto a Scratha heavy cruiser. The brief transit through space in the boarding pod was terrifying, every second expecting to be hit by enemy fire. Then, the impact, the cutting torch burning through the hull, and the explosive breach that sent her team pouring into the enemy ship. The Scratha were waiting. The corridors became a nightmare of close combat. Humans with guns and blades against Scratha with natural weapons and terrifying strength. Gonzalez fought beside her squad, each human watching the other's backs, covering each other's weaknesses. Push forward, she shouted over the comm. Find the command center. Find the brain. They fought through corridor after corridor, leaving dead Scratha behind them. The ship's organic walls seemed to pulse and writhe, making every step feel like moving through a living nightmare. But the Marines pushed on, driven by training and determination. Gonzalez's team found what they were looking for, a central chamber where the Scratha ship's coordination was managed. And there, protected by a dozen warriors, was Hive Commander ZX Thor. The fight was brutal and desperate. 2 Marines died in the first 30 seconds. Gonzalez took a wound across her ribs that would have been fatal if not for her armor. But they kept fighting, kept pushing, until finally, ZX Thor stood alone. The Hive Commander looked at Gonzalez with compound eyes that somehow conveyed intelligence and understanding. It spoke through a translation device. Its voice, buzzing and alien. "You are the humans," ZX Thor said. "The myths that were true. I studied your wars. I learned your tactics. I thought I understood you." "And now?" Gonzalez asked, keeping her weapon trained on the creature. "Now I understand that understanding is not enough. You fight like you have already accepted death. That makes you unstoppable." ZX Thor tilted its head. "My swarm thought the galaxy was weak. We thought we could consume without consequence. You have taught us we were wrong. Yeah, well, that lesson cost billions of lives. I know. The swarm knows. We will carry this knowledge forward." ZX Thor seemed to sag. "Will you spare the young? The ones who have not yet chosen warfare? Can humans show mercy to monsters?" Gonzalez hesitated. This was beyond her authority. She opened a channel to Captain Chen. "Ma'am, I have the enemy commander. It is asking for mercy for non-combatants. I need guidance." Ma'am, I have the Super Zanhua." Chen's voice came back immediately. "Put it on ship-wide communication. I want to hear what it has to say." ZX Thor's message was broadcast to the entire human fleet. It spoke of the Scratha homeworld below, where billions of young were being raised in nurseries, too small and undeveloped to fight. It spoke of the mistake the swarm had made, thinking the galaxy was theirs for the taking. It offered complete and unconditional surrender. If the young would be spared. "Why should we believe you?" Admiral Rivera demanded. "You used peace talks as a trick before." "Because now, we truly understand what we face. Because the swarm has learned fear. Because you have broken our strength and our will to continue this war." ZX Thor's voice carried what might have been sadness. "We are defeated. We ask only that the young, who had no choice in our actions, be allowed to live. Let them learn from our mistake. Let them grow, to be better than we were." Admiral Rivera looked at Captain Chen. The entire command staff looked at each other. This was the moment they had feared and hoped for. The chance to show mercy, or the necessity to be ruthless. Chen spoke carefully, weighing every word. "If we accept your surrender, there will be terms. Harsh terms. The Scratha will be confined to your home system. You will be monitored constantly. Any sign of military buildup, any hint of renewed aggression, and we will return to finish what we started. You will release any surviving prisoners and provide records of every world you attacked. Your species will spend the next 1,000 years proving you can be peaceful. Can the swarm accept these terms?" "Yes," ZX Thor said without hesitation. "The swarm accepts. We surrender." The battle stopped abruptly. Scratha ships powered down their weapons and transmitted surrender codes. The human fleet held its fire, though every weapon stayed trained on the enemy. It took 12 hours to process the surrender. Scratha ships were disarmed and escorted to holding positions. Human Marines occupied the orbital platforms. And slowly, cautiously, the truth of what ZX Thor had said was confirmed. The Scratha homeworld did have billions of young, nurseries filled with creatures that had not yet developed into warriors, civilians who had never left the planet, who had no concept of the war their species had waged. Not innocent, perhaps, but not guilty either. Kelrix accompanied Captain Chen to the planet's surface as part of the official surrender ceremony. Walking through the Scraith city was surreal. The architecture was organic, grown rather than built. The population watched the humans with fear and something that might have been awe. ZX Thor, now officially the Scraithi's representative, led them to a central plaza where the formal surrender would be signed. Thousands of Scraithi gathered to witness. "Why did you stop?" Zexthor asked Chen quietly as they prepared for the ceremony. "You could have destroyed us all. Why show mercy to a species that showed you none?" Chen looked at the Hive commander with tired eyes. "Because we have been the monsters before, Commander. In our own history, humans did terrible things to each other. We committed genocides. We enslaved entire populations. We nearly destroyed ourselves half a dozen times. We know what it is to be the villains of our own story. So you stopped from guilt? No. We stopped because we learned that being strong means knowing when not to use your strength. The greatest power is not in destroying your enemies. It is in choosing not to destroy them when you have the power to do so. That is what separates civilization from barbarism." The surrender was signed. The Scraithi officially submitted to council authority, with human enforcement. The war that had killed billions was finally over. The human fleet began the long process of withdrawal, leaving behind monitoring stations and a garrison force. The council slowly returned to peace, though now with a permanent defense force trained by human advisors. Kelrix returned to the council chamber for the official recognition ceremony. Moravix stood before the assembled delegates, their energy field bright and strong again. "We gathered here months ago in fear and desperation," the council leader began. "We faced an enemy we could not defeat, armed with weapons we had forgotten how to wield. We were saved by a species we thought was a myth, by warriors we had dismissed as propaganda. Today, we formally recognize Earth as a full member of the Galactic Council, with all rights and privileges. More than that, we recognize that the galaxy needs species like humanity, species that remember how to fight, not for conquest, but for protection." Captain Chen stood to accept the recognition. She looked small next to some of the larger delegates, but Kelrix had learned that human strength had nothing to do with their physical size. "The Council honors us," Chen said simply. "But we did not fight for honor or recognition. We fought because you needed help, and we were able to provide it. That is what allies do. That is what friends do. Earth will always answer when the Council calls for aid. But please," her expression turned serious, "please remember what this war cost. Remember that peace is precious, but fragile. Remember that sometimes, the only way to preserve peace is to be prepared for war. Do not forget again." The chamber filled with applause and the various ways different species showed approval. Kelrix found himself making his own species' gesture of respect, his scales rippling in waves. Later, aboard the Valor one last time before returning to Earth, Kelrix shared a private moment with Captain Chen. They stood in the observation deck, watching the Council homeworld turn slowly below. "Will you stay?" Kelrix asked. "Will humans remain in Council space? Some of us will. Enough to help train your defense forces, to serve as advisors, to remind you that the galaxy can be dangerous. But most of the fleet will return home. We have our own territory to protect, our own people to care for." Chen smiled slightly. "Besides, you need to learn to defend yourselves. We cannot always be here to save you." "I suppose not. Although it is comforting to know you exist, out there in your hidden systems, prepared for the worst. That is the point, Ambassador. You sleep peacefully because rough people stand ready to do violence on your behalf. That is an old human saying. And it is true. Every peaceful civilization needs its guardians. We are just one species that accepted that role. Will the Scraith truly change? Kelrix asked. Can a species go from what they were to something better? Humans did, Chen replied. We went from warring tribes to a unified civilization. It took thousands of years and countless mistakes, but we did it. The Scratha will have their own journey. It is up to them what they become. We can only provide the chance. Kelrix looked at this human, this warrior who had shown such capacity for both violence and mercy, and felt he finally understood what humanity represented. "You are not really monsters, are you?" he said softly. "Despite what you call yourselves. Despite your weapons, and your wars, and your history." Chen considered this. "We are monsters when we need to be, Ambassador. We do terrible things in service of good causes. We carry that burden so others do not have to. But you are right. We are not just monsters. We are also teachers, and builders, and friends. We are complex, contradictory, and very, very human. Perhaps that is the most important lesson we can teach the galaxy. That you can be many things at once. Strong and gentle. Fierce and kind. Warrior and peacemaker." She extended her hand for the human greeting, and Kelrix took it. "Thank you for coming when we needed you," he said. "Thank you for giving us a reason to reveal ourselves," Chen replied. "We spent 10,000 years preparing for the worst. It is good to know that when the moment came, we were ready." The Valor departed soon after, one ship among thousands, returning to Earth. The human garrison remained behind, a reminder that the galaxy's fairy tale was now its protector. In the years that followed, the story of humanity's intervention became legendary. Species told their children about the humans who came from myth to save the Council, about warriors who fought with honor and mercy, who knew when to strike and when to show compassion. And in the deepest archives, in files marked for future historians, Kelrix completed his final report. It read simply, "They thought Earth was a fairy tale, a myth invented to frighten children. Then the warships jumped into the fray, and we learned the truth. Humanity is real. They were watching, waiting, preparing. And when we needed them most, they proved that the greatest myths are the ones that turn out to be true. We called for help, not expecting an answer. Earth responded with the one thing we had forgotten how to provide: warriors who fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. May we never forget this lesson, and may we never need to call upon them again. But if we do, I believe humanity will answer. That is what heroes do." The galaxy slept peacefully that night, protected by rough people standing ready in the darkness, and in systems hidden from casual observation. Human shipyards continued their work, building and training and preparing, because history had taught them that peace must be defended, and Earth never forgot its commitments.